on your computer, you should see a mic down in the left-hand corner that says mute underneath. You can click on that to mute your computer sound or computer mic. You can use the chat icon to say that you want to speak or to ask a question. Janine will keep her eye on that and interject when it's appropriate. And I just want to remind everyone as well to try to keep your questions to the end of the presentation so that we don't derail the presentations and get ourselves way off track in terms of timing on the agenda. So with that,
wait, and one more thing.
Sorry, if you want anything.
Yeah, Lisa. So if you have a question and you just want me to find the best timing to get to go ahead and ask that question, or if you just want to ask me a question or relay a concern, I am watching my texts on my phone. The phone number is 303-921-2208.
Apologies, that was the last bullet and I jumped off of it. Okay, so let's get started with some site updates from Linda Kiefer. Go ahead, Linda.
Hi, this is Linda Kiefer. I'm the California Gulch Superfund site project manager and the Lowry Landfill project manager, and I have some other duties at EPA. I see a lot of new names on the participant list, so I'd like to welcome you if this is your first CAG meeting that you've attended. I do see that Dietrich's coworker who's working on the site now, Earl Dixon, is on there. Welcome, Earl. And so towards the end of the meeting, if any of you want to say hello, please feel free to raise your hand or contact Janine and she'll open up the mic for you. The site team has been really busy this year, even though COVID has struck in the United States. We've been fast at work. One of the things that we've been working on is the conceptual site model, and Tetra Tech on EPA's behalf and CDM on the WSD's behalf have collaborated, Tetra Tech doing the writing and CDM doing the figures and graphics that go in there. So at this meeting today, we will spend some time. Diane McMillan from Tetra Tech will give us an overview of the conceptual site model. The first draft will be completed by them shortly. The WSDs in the state will comment, and then after that, we'll have a 30-day public review period, hopefully starting in late July or early August. So as we get closer to that, more information will follow. Some other things that we've been working on with the TAG advisors, we've had 2 technical sessions, one in May and one on June 9th. The topic, it started with the North End investigation report, and then it broke off into a surface water discussion, which occurred on June 9th. And we have one scheduled for the 23rd of next week, Tuesday. The TAG advisors will be providing a summary of that discussion at the next CAG meeting. Bonnie and Tom, the CAG co-presidents, have been participating in those phone calls. A next item that we've been updating people on, but it's taken a lot longer than we have expected, is getting a new facilitator on board. It's still in our headquarters. We have not even gotten to the point where we're interviewing potential facilitators, but we hope to be doing that soon, and we'll keep you posted on that. And we apologize for how long it's taking. Another question that's come up in the last couple months is what's the status of the community involvement plan. We did get comments in April from several of the shareholders and stakeholders, including the CAG group. Lisa and Janine have been working very hard to respond to those comments, and a responsiveness summary will come out, and they're intending to have a meeting with you guys in the next couple of weeks or so to discuss your comments and the responses and how those were incorporated into the final plan. And the other thing I wanted to mention is over the past couple months, we've had some questions that have come up, and it seems that the questioner really didn't have a complete data set, and that's why the questions arose when they were looking at different things. So I wanted you to know that EPA will provide any data that you need as a service. So all you have to do is email Lisa and she'll send that over to us. We understand that it might be difficult to pull some of the information out of the Access database, and we want to make sure you're getting the information that you need to inform you and answer any questions that you have. So if there's any particular data that you want, like all the surface water data between a certain time frame, just send Lisa an email and we'll get that to you as quickly as possible, and we'll make sure we turn that around pretty quickly so that you're not waiting on it. So does anyone have any questions about those side updates? Okay. So one of the things that also there were questions on were some rabbits that were found in the Murphy Creek area, and Dustin McNeil with the state of Colorado has provided a handout as an attachment to this meeting as some information he collected, and then he was gonna just kind of talk about that a little bit today too. So if we can turn it over to Dustin.
Thanks, Linda. Hi, I'm Dustin McNeil. I'm the project manager for the Eagle Mine Superfund site, the Lincoln Park Superfund site, and for the Lowry Landfill Superfund site for CDPHE. Regarding the rabbits, the weekend of June 6th, I was copied on a number of correspondence related to a rabbit that had appeared in the vicinity with growths around its mouth region. In the email thread, there was also mention of a question regarding any observations of a large rabbit die-off in the area. In the days following that, I did speak with the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Northeast Regional Office here in Denver, 2 district wildlife managers for the area around the site, and also a Parks and Wildlife pathologist at CSU, and received quite a bit of information specifically related to rabbit papillomas, which would be growths in the mouth region, and then also rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus serotype 2, which is also known as RHDV2, which would be attributed to the die-off. All the information received from the various Parks and Wildlife resources were consistent with one another. And I did receive 2 fact sheets on the papillomas and the RHDV2 that have both been attached, as Linda referenced, to this meeting invitation. So the guidance from Parks and Wildlife on what to do for the suspected cases of either of these do differ. So I'll start with the papillomas. These growths, they did acknowledge that they are very nasty looking. They were kind of likened to warts on humans. They're non-transmissible to humans, and it was told that it does not really affect the animal unless it is severe enough to the point where it's unable to eat or drink. If a homeowner observes a rabbit with growths so severe that it is unable to eat or drink, they should contact Parks and Wildlife, and I will have a number for that. It's rare for the growths to become this bad, but it does occur, and it has been seen in the state of Colorado. If the growths are less severe, the Parks and Wildlife stance is to let nature take its course with that animal. But if the condition where it's so severe that it cannot eat or drink is observed, homeowners should contact the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Northeast Regional Office, and the phone number is 303-291-7227. And they would respond, and I was told that that animal would likely be euthanized. The RHDV2, or the rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus serotype 2, is a fairly recent issue in the state. It's come up from the south and southwest, and was first detected in the state in mid-April of this year, and that was down in Castilla County on our southern border. So the guidance I got from CPW in the case of dead rabbits is, if a homeowner has 3 or more dead rabbits on their property at a given time, that they should contact the Parks and Wildlife Northeast Regional Office at the same number, 303-291-7227, and they will respond. Having 3 or more dead animals on a property at a given time could be an indication of RHDV2. Parks and Wildlife emphasized to me not to handle dead wildlife. Always wear gloves and use a shovel, followed by disinfecting that shovel or any tool or implement with a 10% bleach solution. So yes, the fact sheets provided with this meeting invitation provide quite a bit of supplemental information about each of these. And I'll certainly be the first to acknowledge it's difficult to diagnose an illness via photo, but based on the one rabbit photo that had been circulating around, it appears that papilloma is what may have been affecting that particular animal. And
Hey, Dustin, I've had a request that you speak up just a wee bit, please.
oh, I'm sorry, I'll sit closer. That is all I had. I certainly, if anyone has any questions regarding who to contact or what conditions would warrant reaching out to Parks and Wildlife, I'm always available. Please let me know.
Okay, with that, I think we can move on to the molybdenum update with Dave Wilmoth. And I believe, Janine, you're going to put something up on the screen for him. Dave did have an update to the information that was sent out, I believe.
Hey, Lisa, can I back up just a moment there to the information that Dustin just presented?
Sorry.
We have a question, actually. Is the disease transferable to dogs or cats? Dustin, are you muted?
I'm looking at the fact sheet right now. It does say for RHDV2 that I saw something in here about keeping them away from pets. So if there's a dead animal.
This is Tom. I read your sheet that you put out, and it said the only animal that it would affect would be pet rabbits. And otherwise, other pets were not known to be affected.
Okay. I was reading multiple sick or dead rabbits do not handle, consume sick or dead wildlife, and do not allow pets to contact or consume wildlife carcasses. That's specific to the RHDV2, I should clarify. And I can ask as far as if it is transferable. I would certainly don't have that information at my fingertips, but I can do that.
Thanks, Dustin.
Thanks.
Do we have any more questions on the rabbits? Okay. All right, Dave, are you ready? You're still muted, Dave.
And Dave, know that I muted you because Dustin was talking, so go ahead. Sorry about that.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I think I'm ready. Janine, can you put up the figures?
Just the second
What?
one, yeah?
Well, I want to start with figure 1.
Oh. So it was figure 1 in your email? Let's see here.
It was.
Here it is. I see it. Okay. Bear with me. And I need. Where is it? Can you see that?
Dave, can you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. I'm Dave Wilmoth with City and County of Denver. I'm the city's project manager on Lowry Landfill. And I am going to give you just a quick update on the molybdenum issue. Basically just going to walk you through some figures that we've been presenting been using and have compiled to show kind of the recent results. And we continue to get more results. In fact, these figures came in about 15 minutes ago. So these are revised figures from what was sent out 2 or 3 days ago by Lisa. And so this does have some more data. We've also provided some more information about each of the wells, whether they're compliance wells and their depth on these figures. And so on this first figure, figure 1, I received these 15 minutes ago, so I don't think there were much change or much addition to any of the results. You see most of these results are fairly recent. There are some, and I'll talk about this in the next slide. We do have some older results. You'll see some stuff down to or back to 1995, but that was the most recent result we had for a particular well, and so we reported it. On this figure 1, it's like I said, it's predominantly 2020 molybdenum results in groundwater. All the results are reported as micrograms per liter, so parts per billion range. And then just for reference, the Colorado groundwater standard is 210 micrograms per liter. So that kind of gives you a frame of reference. If we could go to figure 2. This figure as well was updated 15 minutes ago. And it does contain we had a few more results come in the past few days, and so we went ahead and updated them. I didn't get a list of what wells were updated, but I understand it was a handful of results. You will see a lot more 1995 results on here, and we'll be updating those as additional results come in. You will see on here a couple different things. One is I think it was Tom, you had suggested at the April CAG meeting that we should sample the compliance wells. And I want to say thank you for that, because we thought that that was a great idea. And so we are in the process of sampling those compliance wells. And we should be complete with the Weather Dawson compliance wells by next week, which of course is the end of the quarter. And we just have 4 wells remaining. We are still waiting on a large number of results. Janine, can you change to figure 2? And that would be the last email I sent you.
One second. Hello? There you are.
Go downstairs. Go downstairs. Go.
That's the one, yes?
I believe so, yes. Okay, I think so. And so this is figure 2, and this just shows site-wide, and it does show compliance wells on there. And so, as I was saying, without Tom's idea of sampling the compliance wells was a good one. We're in the process of doing that. We should be complete with the Weather Dawson compliance wells. Next week we got 4 more wells to sample, and for some of the other for the other compliance wells, Weather Dawson compliance wells, we're just waiting on results to come back from the laboratory. And so by the next CAG meeting, the July CAG meeting, we should have a figure that shows all of the results for the Weather Dawson compliance wells. We are, as far as the other compliance wells, the deeper wells, so we are sampling those as well. The unweathered Dawson compliance wells are scheduled to be sampled 3rd quarter. So that's.
This is John Barber. I have a question real quick. When you said you're checking those wells.
I'm actually almost, hey John, I'm almost done. Can I just, can we just
Okay,
hold on,
right.
like say 60 seconds and then I can take questions? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So we are sampling the Weather Dawson compliance wells. That'll be done 3rd quarter, which is July through September. Those results should be available early part of 4th quarter. As for the Denver and Lignite compliance wells, those are scheduled in the next few years. Those have a multi-year sampling frequency associated with them, but they are on tap to be sampled for moly as a part of our normal sampling. Also on this figure is, you'll see to the between the North Brandy Barrier Wall and Yale Avenue to the north, we are showing results for some of the north end wells in that area, and those are all recent sampling events, as you can see, with the results shown. And then just lastly, we had included a 3rd figure, which oddly enough is labeled figure 4, and it just is included just to show scale and distance. So kind of summarize, there's more data that's coming. We'll be sharing that in future CAG meetings, and I hope that you find this information useful. So John, what was your question?
My question was, you were talking about the compliance wells and that you were going to check the compliance wells and get back with us in July. Are you just checking for the moly, or are you going to check those compliance wells for 1,4-dioxane as well?
So what we're doing is we've got a compliance well sampling schedule. So they're sampled on a regular frequency. So like weather Dawson compliance wells are sampled on a quarterly basis. So as those wells come up on the schedule for sampling, we're going out and sampling. A part of our analytes that we collect for are there's 2 metals that we sample for under our compliance, and so we're collecting that metal sample, having it analyzed, and just including the molybdenum as an additional analyte as a part of that regular test that we're doing.
Thank you.
Sure.
Dave, could I ask a question? This is Tom Kraus.
Sure.
One is, I noticed that on your first slide that the MW113-WD, the concentration of molybdenum has increased from 31,000 to 38,000, despite the fact that you've reduced the pumping from 3+ gallons per minute down to 1 gallon per minute.
Hey Tom, that's MW113 WD.
I think so. That I'd have to see the slide to be sure that, but I think that's the one.
Yeah, I think that's a monitoring well, and it's not the actual. It's very close to the extraction well.
Okay.
But those results are consistent with the, as I recall, the monitoring well, not the extraction well. The extraction well is high, but not 38,000.
Okay. I don't remember what the MW113WD was, but it was below 38,000 before. Anyway, it appears to be going up. Is that of any concern to you?
Going from, what was it, 31 to 38? Yeah, we're seeing increases in the extraction well as well. I think our most recent result was 9,000. So it's gone up. So I'm not surprised at the well that I think the monitoring well is 25 feet to the south of the extraction well. So given their proximity, I'm not surprised that both are increasing.
Right. And also you said that you were going to measure the Denver monitoring well and the lignite monitoring wells. But as you said it, you indicated that they would only be monitored in the next couple of years per schedule. Are you going to push up that schedule for checking the moly now, or just is it going to be in 2 years?
No, our intent is to sample per the regular sampling frequency, and there are several technical issues related with that that make us want to stick to that schedule.
So you're not going to be sampling them now, right?
No, we're not.
Okay.
They're a few years out. I don't have the schedule in front of me, but I think Tim Shinger had told me. We're talking. They might be done by 2023 because those deeper wells are on a 5-year schedule.
The reason I'm asking that is because at the well where molybdenum was found, that was supposedly in about the deepest trough of the unweathered Dawson, and because you were pumping at 3+ gallons per minute, you were pulling stuff from that area and possibly below. And then when you reduce the amount of pumping to 1 gallon per minute. And at least for a while, you had a reduction in the amount of molybdenum you had. So it may be coming from deeper. And if it is coming from deeper, if you're not going to wait, if you're going to wait for 2 years, isn't that a problem as to finding the source?
I don't believe so, because again, you know, if it's a source that is coming from the near surface, i.e., something associated with contaminants from the landfill mass itself, they would show up in the shallow first. They would show up in those weathered Dawson compliance wells.
Well, let me go on from that then. They're talking.
If it's naturally occurring, it might. You're correct. It might be deeper.
Right, and that was the implication in one of the articles that was given to us for this meeting. That they felt it was naturally occurring in clay, and that might be deeper. The one thing that hasn't been answered in my mind related to the source is you've got molybdenum, which is a non-soluble metal, and is not going to come into water unless it becomes soluble. So I was trying to do some research on what makes molybdenum soluble, and it appears that it's soluble if 2 things happen, maybe and or. One is that it's a very low oxygen condition, which was what you'd be expecting in unweathered Dawson or lower because there's less oxygen down there. And the other is that it would be a high pH. In other words, it would be basic as versus acidic. And so I'm asking now, have you checked those conditions? And have you considered using checking of well water to find out if maybe the basic and hypo or low oxygen water that is dissolving the molybdenum is coming from the site? And because that's the normal flow, is from south to north. And if it's coming from the site, that might be one of the ways that you could reduce the molybdenum from moving north by treating that water that is low oxygen and basic.
Yep. So the short answer to your question, Tom, is yes, we have looked at that. That information is being included in a technical memo on this. I've seen pieces and parts of that memo, but I haven't seen the entire. I haven't reviewed the entire thing. But that issue of EH and pH solubility and mineral phase were all assessed as a part of that, a part of our efforts.
Are there any deeper wells into the Denver that aren't monitoring wells that aren't on your schedule that you can then test?
Are there? Can you say that again?
I'm wondering, you're saying you can't test your monitoring wells except on schedule because it has some technical issues with it. Mm-hmm. Are there deeper wells in that area that are not monitoring wells that you can test? Because it would seem very pertinent to the answer of all those questions to know what's going on deeper.
Mm-hmm.
Dave, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, so hi, Tom, this is Tim Shangra. So to answer the question about vertical gradients, if you will, we do have sample results from deeper wells within the 113 well pair. And we have one well pair, basically the deepest of the 113 wells. It's 113 LD. And I think our concentration is less than 10 micrograms per liter. So, and then we've got another one that's UD, that's a bit higher. And then we've got, of course, the WDs that are much higher. So we see a gradient going upward not downward. That would imply that the source is not coming from depth.
And how much does your pumping rate have to do with that?
Probably not a lot, because there's not a lot of vertical upward migration from depth. In those numbers, if you, Nadine, if you, or could you bring up figure
Janine.
one? Janine's, thank you. Could you bring up figure one? We could actually point to those numbers. So for example, Tom, our pumping rate from MW113UD, which is pumping concurrent with MW113EW1, 113UD is about 0.1 gallon a minute. We pump much more than that and the well dries up. Whereas we can pump EW1, geez, we could probably pump that 5-10 gallons a minute if we wanted to. But we can't pump it much more, as you know, because the moly concentrations will interfere with our ability to meet the discharge permit for the treatment plant.
That brings up another thing that I would like to ask Dustin in relation to this is, does the state of Colorado have any concerns about this moly getting into groundwater above the state limits? And for the EPA, they are supposed to be following those state limits and not allowing them to go off site because it's an ARAR. Is that correct?
Hey, Tom, this is Dustin. To answer your question about concern, yes, the state is concerned. The molybdenum state standard and its applicability at this site is something that's still being discussed. I have done quite a bit of research myself on the timeline of standards in the state of Colorado for groundwater for molybdenum, going back to 1990 rulemaking hearing. I'm not 100% sure at this point, but all the information I've gathered thus far, the state of Colorado did not have a standard for molybdenum in groundwater on March 10th, 1994, when the ROD was signed for this site. Additionally, molybdenum is not listed as a contaminant of concern. That is still a concern of mine, but I just wanted to let you know that that's what I've gotten thus far. I'm looking at what was the standard in the state of Colorado, because the ROD cited 5 CCR 1002-8, which then segued to 5 CCR 1002-41, which is, as you know, regulation 41. So a lot of times we look at that regulation in its current form, but I'm having to do a little bit of, well, a lot of looking back in time to see what did that regulation say at the time.
Well, back in the day, that 1,4 doc was a contaminant of concern, and yet it is, and according to as I read the ROD, it says that the state standards are the ARRs, and it doesn't just say that it's the standards back then. And as a matter of fact, they've accepted the upgraded standards of the current MW of the current standard 41 for 1,4-dioxane at current concentration standards, because 1,4-dioxane is 100 micrograms per liter, and now it's 0.35 for the state. So it seems that to me that it's applicable, and they don't say whether it's an ARR back at that time. They say that the state standards are an ARR, and they refer to that, and that has grandfathered into 41.
Yes, I know that we do have some discussions with EPA planned along ARARs for other reasons, and this is something that I would like to bring into that discussion.
And the other point is that if you're going to hold, say, Climax and molybdenum mine and Henderson molybdenum mine to a water standard of 210, and yet something is happening here that suddenly molybdenum is being dissolved in the water at 38,000, how can you not hold whatever cause it is to be for maintaining the state standards? Otherwise, you're just going to let 38,000 micrograms per milliliter go on flow downstream, because they're not going to pump it up, because they want to keep to the standards of Aurora water.
So
This go ahead, Steve.
sorry, Tom, I appreciate you bringing up the issue. This is a good example, I think, of where the Superfund process is not apparent, is not completely transparent to folks and how it works. The citation in the ROD and what part of what Dustin was referring to, and the reason he had to go back and look at what was in place with regard to the state regulations on that date when the ROD was signed, is because the requirements, these ARARs as we call them, are in fact frozen at the time of that decision document when they're signed. So it is important what was in place, what the version of the state requirement was back in 1994. So I think it is true that it wasn't identified in the ROD in 1994. It wasn't identified as a contaminant of concern. Now, the other side of that discussion, it relates to the changes. Requirements change, new science becomes available. We realize that some things that we hadn't looked for or hadn't viewed as problems in the past are in fact, potential concern. So the way our process, the Superfund process, addresses that is to do 5-year reviews, look at changes to all kinds of things, but including the regulations and how those changes might relate to the site and the decision document. So just because a standard either comes into existence where none existed before, or a standard changes, and it can change in either direction and become more or less stringent. But if it changes, that alone does not trigger a change in the decision document. The other part that has to be true is the other issue that you potential issue that you alluded to is the contaminant moving? Is it moving off-site? Is it going to a location where it could constitute a complete exposure pathway for human or ecological receptors, for that matter, depending on what the standard is all about. So at this point in time, that discussion that Dustin mentioned still needs to take place. We need to look at this issue. recognize what changes may have occurred, and there could have been several, to the standard from 1994 through today, 2020. And then that's part of it. As I said, we need to look at the changes, see how that relates to the site, the information that we have about the site, and then try to address that second part of the question, that is, okay, if we know it's there, what's happening to it? Is it going somewhere? And if so, what does that mean? You know, are there receptors there, or you know, or not? So, so there's still some unanswered questions. We recognize this is a concern. The state and EPA are, you know, having those discussions about, well, what's the current requirement? How does that relate to what's going on here? There's another aspect of this, which I know we've talked about before in some earlier meetings, and that is that the work settling defendants are treating this, they're managing this, and they have other requirements that they have to meet in the form of their pre-treatment permit for their industrial discharge. So, so there's several different things going on surrounding this one contaminant of concern, but we're not done yet. You know, there's still some open questions and more discussion that we need to have. But I guess I just wanted to, you know, for the sake of conversation and being transparent, I just wanted folks to understand that just because a state standard changes, that does not immediately or automatically change the requirements for the site. There are these other questions that we have to answer before we take that step to change the remedy, the decision document for the site.
Janine, this is Bonnie. May I make a comment?
Oh, of course, jump right in, Bonnie, go ahead.
You're muted, Bonnie.
Oh, I understand what you said, Steve. And the only thing that I would like to point out is that we are very concerned that these are the same things that were said about MW38, and we still have MW38 after all these years out of compliance, being managed, being investigated, and yet we're moving towards a point where we're going to say the site is protective. And we're just concerned because way back in 2006, the community was saying, why don't you have to stop this? And we were told because it's not a chemical of concern and it's not above certain levels. Well, now the levels have changed and we're concerned that as time goes on, we're going to be in the same position 20 years from now with the molybdenum, and we aren't really sure what those effects are going to be. So we just would prefer not to have another MW38 to be checking up on 20 years from now. And that was our concern.
Okay, thanks.
So this is Tim. Tom, if I can come back to this figure, this posts the data for the wells that we were talking about. So on 113 LD, you can see that's 10 micrograms per liter. The next one up is MW 113 WUD, that's 1800. And of course, the one that we're talking about that we're pumping is now at 10,000. So you've got an upward gradient, not a downward gradient. Implying that it's the source is not necessarily, doesn't appear to be coming from depth.
MW113 WD is deeper than MW113 Upper Dawson.
And so, go ahead, finish.
38,000 and Upper Well has 1800.
MW113 WD You're correct. Is 38,000.
Okay, great.
MW 113 EW1 and has 10,000. Both WD and EW1 are roughly completed at the same interval. They're both weathered Dawson wells.
I understand now.
Okay, so now if you go vertically down, then concentrations decline with distance, with depth.
Okay. Then we're going to have to figure out why they're coming from the upper part, because they don't seem to be coming from any of the other wells around.
You're correct, and that's what we're working on.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for clarifying those questions, and I'm happy to hear that you guys are discussing this and seeing this as a problem. I would like to just suggest that there's one other possibility is that well, there's two concerns. One is that the site, if they wish to, might upgrade the treatment so that they could treat higher doses of higher amounts of molybdenum. And that's something you guys have to decide whether you're willing to do that. But then there's a conundrum as to if that water then starts going downstream, and we already know that it can go all the way down to well, like 1,4-dioxane went 4 miles out of the site or 3 miles. Look at it. So the state's left with a conundrum. Do they want to accept that? And that's going to have to be their decision too. But I really appreciate the fact that you guys are talking about it and trying to figure it out.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate that. This is Dave. Hey, so just a couple things. One, we are actually looking at treatment systems right now so that we can pump the extraction well and treat for molybdenum and meet our discharge requirement. And two, although it's not shown on here, I think you've seen other figures. The extraction in the center of this area which is extracting the 1,4-dioxane is causing, I think, as you know, a cone of depression in this area. So this blob of molybdenum is not going anywhere because of our extraction. And maybe next meeting we can we'll prepare figures so you can reference that.
Great.
Thanks.
Okay, well, I'd like, if everyone is amenable and there are no more questions, to move along to our conceptual site model presentation.
Actually, if you wouldn't mind, I've got a couple of questions on Molly.
Okay.
I'll try to keep it brief. And at first, I'm glad to see that this is being added to the a sampling routine for the rest of the wells. I think that information is important to gather. I'm a little concerned with the handout that was given, the little sheet. There's a few statements on it I think we need to kind of keep in perspective. It states that sources are not waste buried on the landfill. Moly is an incredibly commonly used in a variety of industrial processes, paints, catalysts, plastics, dyes, solvents, lubricants. We would fully expect it to be present at the landfill. The question is it mobilized from the landfill? I think that statement might be a little bit broad, if not just plain incorrect. So I would request that, I don't know if this has gone out or not, but it might be important to at least take that out, or to indicate that it is something that we do see in landfills. As far as its presence in that area, I appreciate the additional data being collected, because it is kind of, how much of it is naturally occurring, what of it could be a release, or how much of it is simply mobilized by water chemistry changes in that area, either from a natural or from the site. Well, I think will have to be considered, but I'm not sure how to go about how to make a change in that sheet as far as it being found at the landfill, though.
Hey, Dietrich,
when we look at this data, I think approaching it from that, making sure we have that in mind is going to be important when we analyze this data.
Hey, Dietrich, I'll just point out, you should take a look at the figures that we handed out. They have results for the North Toe system, and so North Toe system, That's catching the bulk, the highest concentration of leachate coming off the landfill mass. It does not have elevated molybdenum.
And I noticed that in 95, you were getting hits of about 45 upgraded from where you're finding it now. I'm not saying that
Look at the
it's
bigger.
localized
Those
or
are
that that's the source. I'm
2020.
simply saying it's
Those are
incorrect.
2020 results for the North Toe.
And DJ,
Okay.
when they did the initial investigations, when they determined what the contaminants of concern were, they looked at moly, and there was not enough moly in the landfill area to even list it as a contaminant of concern. So if that's information you'd like to provide us to provide to you, we certainly can do that.
Let me kind of restate, and maybe this will offer some clarification. There is some landfills never release moly despite the fact it's present in the waste because of the water chemistry or how it is disposed of or the construction of the landfill. So I'm not saying that there's a history of moly in groundwater. I'm saying it's incorrect to say there was never moly disposed of at this site, because there probably was. The question is not if it's present, because that can almost be assumed. It's, is it being released? And I think that some of the language in this gives one the impression that moly was never disposed of at the site, which is not something the data indicates. What you're talking about, Linda, and I think what was the last speaker was talking about, was it's not been found in the assessment in groundwater. And I don't think there's a question to that. And I think we'll probably, it's relatively easy to look at the data. And if it had been, we would see it in the COC list. But I'm just, what's being provided to the public needs to be factual, most importantly. We want to not lead anybody in the wrong direction. And our investigation needs to be based on facts. And the fact is there's probably moly present in the landfill. It's just a question of if it's being released. It was not found to be released during the initial assessment. That's correct, but it doesn't mean it's not present in the waste that's in the landfill to start with.
So if I may, I don't think anyone's arguing that there may not be moly in the landfill. The question is the source of the moly in this 113 trough area coming from the landfill? And the data that Dave has shown, both in terms of figure 1 and figure 2, indicate that there does not appear to be a pathway between either the landfill and the 113 trough or the waste pits in the 113 trough. So that's the line of evidence that is being used, being relied on to make the statement that it does not appear to be coming from the landfill or from buried waste. That's good science.
So I don't know that we're going to get an answer on this one right now, but I do think we have a disagreement that needs to be discussed further. This is Bonnie, and I would like to suggest that at some date in the near future we have a meeting on the moly. But in the meantime, before you move on, I understand we have the CSM to talk about. However, Tom Kraus did ask a question at the last meeting, and it was about the 1,4-dioxane in the deep unweathered bedrock. And I was wondering if there was someone that could answer his question.
So Tom, do you want to restate your Tom, is that the question that we sent you a response to in the last couple of days? Is that what Bonnie's referring to?
Yeah, that's a question that you sent me a response to. I had asked that there were 6 deep groundwater wells north of the site that had been, only one of them had been tested for molybdenum in 2000, I mean, not for 1,4-dioxane in 2019. And your answer to me, if I am correct, was all of the wells were tested for 1,4-dioxane, but they were tested, those other wells were tested for in 2018. And therefore, all 6 wells had been tested for 1,4-dioxane, but 5 of them haven't been tested in 2019. And I don't know if they've been tested in 2020.
So Tim Shangra, do you want to take that? You're most familiar with that data.
And so I think the fact sheet indicated that the data that were reported in the North End report contained those results. And I think, Tom, your question was, why weren't those results reported in the SSRs? Is that correct? Did you hear me?
I'm sorry.
Was I muted? Did you hear my question?
I heard you, but you didn't hear me because I had muted myself. I'm sorry.
Okay, sure.
I thought the O&M report was supposed to 2019. Any O&M report is supposed to have all data in it, isn't it?
The database has all data in it, sure. But the discussion in the report focuses on the compliance wells.
And the deep wells, I guess only one of the deep wells was compliance well.
Was that 113? I'm not sure which well you're referring to.
I don't have my.
I think it's on the north end, right?
So we don't have deep compliance wells north of 113.
Okay. All right. So I've learned something. You're telling me that the O&M report doesn't have all the data in it.
No, that's not what I said. I said the O&M report has a database that contains all the data, but the O&M report itself does not discuss the North End data.
Well, it did. Oh, I see. So again, I guess this is where what Dietrich had problem with last time we talked was that the only way to get to this, to some of the stuff, is to go into, what is it, the access report, I guess you call it?
It's a groundwater analytical database, the GAD, correct?
Yeah. Okay, so were they tested then in 2019?
I'm not sure. I don't believe that they were. But all the wells that were tested in 2018 as part of the North End report indicated they were non-detect for 1,4-dioxane down to an MDL of 0.15.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, folks, hopefully we can move on to the next topic so we don't have to send Diane away again without giving her presentation.
If I could just add one little correction to that. I think that, and I understand, Tom, that topic is kind of hard to wrap your head around because there's 113 with the compliance well, and then there's some deeper wells on the north end that have been installed. And the most north ones, it's been about 12 months since they were sampled, and I think most of them have been sampled. The most northern ones have been only sampled once. 1,4-dioxane was not found in them. There was some trace acetone. On the site itself, 2 of the deep wells have had 1,4-dioxane hits in the last 5 years. The last 2 sampling events they had, there were a couple of hits, GW106, which is one near NW38, and B504A, which is near the middle of the site. They were relatively low, but it was detected. And the same acetone hits kind of follow those north end, the on-site wells as well. So that might add some clarification, looking at all the deep wells in general without the different compliance labels, this label, north end study label, but as a group.
Thank you.
Yeah, and to clarify that, what we're talking about is acetone, which is a common laboratory contaminant. But I think Tom's question is, how deep is 1,4-dioxane? And the 1,4-dioxane and any other VOC, which are compounds of concern, are not detected in the deep wells north of the site.
I hate to point this out, acetone is not as common a laboratory contaminant anymore, and those samples did pass the QA/QC, which means acetone wasn't found in the blanks, but that's a discussion for a later time.
Right, and so this is Linda. I'm going to add to that. I did have our contractor PWT look at the acetone, and they're writing something up because they do think it is a laboratory contaminant. And so when that's ready, I will share it with the group. So, because you had brought this up before, so we did have them look into that, and that was there. And Lori writes on the phone. If I don't know if Lori wants to add anything at this time. If not, that's okay, because we're going to run out of time for the CSM, and we have some cool pictures we wanted to show you, so we can postpone that for another day. So you ready for CSM? All right. Is Diane ready?
I am.
Okay.
Janine, you have the presentation?
I'm going to share. Is it up?
Oh, yep, I see it.
Okay, let me.
Yeah. So while you're doing that, I'll introduce myself. My name is Diane Macmillan, and I am with Tetra Tech, and we're a consultant for EPA. And I'm going to tell you about the updated conceptual site model. As Linda has said, that we are currently updating the CSM for Lowry Landfill. A conceptual site model is a comprehensive site overview. So what it intends to do is give you a living representation of what the site, what's happening at the site, the different components of it. And that includes the site setting, the history, the investigations that have been going on, the waste disposal practices, the contamination, every component of the site. And it's called a living representation because the idea is that it should be updated frequently. As you get more information, it should be updated and evolve with the site. So basically this presentation is just to give you the answers to some common questions that you might have about the conceptual site model. And so I will go through kind of the basic who, what, when, where, why questions. Perfect timing. So if you want to go on to the first slide about why we are updating the conceptual site model.
Oh, there we go.
Next one more. There we go. So the reason we are updating the conceptual site model is, first of all, it was a recommendation in the last 5-year review that was completed in 2017. That was part of a recommendation for OU1, which is Operable Unit 1, which involves the shallow groundwater and the subsurface liquids. And a CSM should be updated anyway to reflect our current understanding of site components. I believe the last time we had a good comprehensive conceptual site model was maybe in the ROD, which was in 1994. There have, of course, been updates and evaluations of the remedy in the 5-year reviews, and those provide a lot of updated information. But EPA recognized the need to have a good comprehensive update of the site model. And this is a great tool to communicate site information with all stakeholders and between all stakeholders to make sure that we are all in agreement on what is happening at the site and what is our current understanding of the site. So since there hasn't been a comprehensive update to the conceptual site model since '94, there are a lot of the remedy components that haven't been incorporated into it. It's also part of EPA's emphasis on life cycle CSMs. It's a best management practice for EPA nationwide to keep conceptual site models updated at different stages. And of course, your conceptual site model looks very different at the beginning of a site than it does at a more mature site like this, where you have 40 years of investigation and action at the site. So who is updating the conceptual site model? This one is a joint effort between EPA and the WSDs. PWT, which is the small business contractor for EPA, and Tetra Tech, who is a subcontract to PWT. We're representing EPA for the CSM. And then the WSDs have tasked CDM Smith, their contractor, to work on it with us. So we're tasked with writing the draft, creating all the visual aids, and then responding to any comments that come up. What areas of the site will be included in the CSM update? This is basically all of it. The original landfill waste, the original landfill and waste pits that started the site, that are within the site boundary, and then also the contaminated media. This is where it's broken out into operable unit. There are 6 operable units for groundwater, landfill solids, soil gas, surface water, and sediments. And it'll also include, you know, the hot topics like the north end 1,4-dioxane plume, and then, you know, more recently evaluated contamination like the molybdenum. And then, of course, we will talk about the remedy components that have been put in place since the last time the CSM was updated, and their effects on the migration and the fate and transport of the contamination. What data will we use for the update? It's important to note that this is not an investigation. The CSM won't have new data associated with it. It is a compilation of all the site data collected. That includes historical data, so like the early remedial investigations that were completed in the 90s. Of course, the decision documents that laid out the risks and the actions associated with it. The 5-year reviews that talk about the compliance of the site with the remedial action objectives. And of course, the biannual site status reports the WSDs provide that talk about the maintenance and monitoring that have been ongoing for the last 20-some years. It also will include data from recent investigations. That includes the 3D data visualization and analysis that we did to interpret the data. The 2018 synoptic sampling, which was, you know, a great comprehensive groundwater sampling event. The North End investigation, which we've been talking about a little bit, and also some of the recent investigations that are ongoing and monitoring ongoing with the potable water injection cessation and the North Boundary Barrier Wall monitoring. This is kind of the basic layout of the conceptual site model and the sections incorporated into the document. It'll have a site description, the basic setting, ecology, populations, the site background and history, when the waste was placed, what was placed there, a history of the investigations that have been conducted at the site since the 80s. And of course, the regulatory actions and agreements. It will include a discussion of the remedy components and how they were incorporated to address the potentially unacceptable risks from the waste. Of course, the geology and hydrogeology to indicate where the groundwater or the contamination might migrate or how it would migrate if it does. The nature and extent of contamination, the fate and transport of the contamination, basically how it moves from groundwater to soil gas, et cetera. And then a summary of risks to human health and the environment. How will the CSM be presented? The CSM is typically a combination of a narrative and then graphics. So it's like a typical report that you see with data tables and GIS figures. But we've also been able to incorporate a lot of illustrations and the 3D VA graphics. So Linda will bring up a couple of examples that we brought. I've cautioned that these examples are not complete. There's still a lot of tinkering that needs to be done. So consider them draft, but they were just really cool. And we kind of wanted to show them off to you because we're pretty proud of all of the graphics that we've been able to produce. For example, this one and the following are graphics that were produced from the 3-dimensional data visualization and analysis. And we were able to use various software to create these graphics that will be part of the CSM. This one in particular was with our 3DBA software, and it can show you a rotatable image of different aspects of the site. If you want to go on to the next one. I'm not really going to go through what is shown in some of these. These are just kind of examples of how we're going to present this data to you in kind of interesting and informative ways, we hope. This is another example of how we can use the 3DBA software to depict, in this case, the hydrolithology of the unweathered formations. And moving on to example number 3, is just to show that we were also incorporating the use of aerial photos. This is an aerial photo from 1965, and we are using this to show historic stream changes. This was Murphy Creek in 1965. And it's just kind of cool. You know, we have a lot of conceptual information about how stream meanders or stream cutoffs occur, but you know, we can also show some historic photos of it actually happening at the site. So that's exciting. The next one is an illustration that CDM Smith has provided, which I think is just really cool. It shows a lot of the basic depositional environment of how Murphy Creek or some of the unnamed creek or the water floodplain in the area developed, and how deposits can you know, either erode or deposit on the banks, and just all of the different forces that come into play in the site. So this is an example of some of the illustrations that CDM Smith has provided. The next one. So the next 3 are illustrations that depict different components of the site. For example, this is an illustration that shows the MW38 sand channel and the extraction features as part of the sand channel. And I think it gives you a really good look at, you know, what's going on, and it's a lot easier to understand some of these concepts when you can see them. The next one is the, I believe it's the North Boundary Barrier Wall. Am I wrong? No, it's the landfill. Yeah, so this is the landfill cover and landfill gas collection system. And it just kind of shows how the landfill waste was placed and some of the different factors of how the waste might cause leachate and where that would go into the environment. So some of these components are easily shown but hard to describe in text. And so that's why I think these are pretty cool. And then that last one, I believe, is the surface water removal action. Yes. And this kind of shows a schematic of how the surface water removal action was constructed, how it works. And it's just pretty neat, I think. The last one kind of shows how, you know, we can also incorporate the engineered drawings into the conceptual site model. So, you know, we can pull in design drawings and documents that show actual, I guess, scale and size. So I mean, these are just kind of examples of all of the things that we're trying to pull into the conceptual site model to make it a comprehensive document. And then if you want to go back to the last slide that talks about when you get to see all of these things for real, when will the CSM update be available? Currently, we're working on it still, and it's under EPA oversight. And then the state and the WSDs will provide comments. We will incorporate those comments, and then there will be a 30-day public review process where the CAG and the community can provide comments and feedback on it. We're estimating that that will occur in late September. Well, that it'll be finalized in late September. So we will take comments from the community, address them, and then finalize the CSM. And that's all I had. I went fast so that we can make up time.
Diane, this is Tom Krause. I have a question. I've been reading the groundwater monitoring plan revision 2, and in there they say that the water on page 16, water level monitoring data will be used to determine and then the multiple things, but then part of the sentence is capture zones. So when you're doing the conceptual site model, will you be providing us capture zones in 3D for the north end, for the area around the north boundary burial wall, for the area where, what is it, Tetra something is going out, is escaping from the slurry wall on the east side? Are you going to be, and for MW38, are you going to be showing us capture zones in 3 dimensions for all of those?
Well, those investigations are going on concurrently, separate from the CSM at the moment. Once those investigations are complete and finalized, then they can be incorporated into the CSM. But again, you know, we're not creating new data or evaluation in the CSM. There is, you know, a limited amount of anything that you would see that's new. But it's a compilation of all of the work that's been completed. So once those CSM or capture zone analyses are done at the different parts where they're currently working, then they can be incorporated into the CSM.
Yeah, but MW38 is old. The stuff that's been going to the east out of the slurry wall is old. Able to provide, and I guess part of the problem is water leveling monitoring data is not the only thing that's included in creating a capture zone. And, so if you're really trying to figure out whether your extraction wells are pulling in everything like they should, then you have to have a capture zone shown and indicate whether it's working. And if you don't have a capture zone, how do you have a capture conceptual site model?
Well, we take the conclusions of previous reports, and there are different ways we can visualize the data and the conclusions from previous reports that might be slightly different, that would help with understanding of the data. But, you know, I guess when I hear capture zone analysis, that means something different to me. That means, you know, groundwater model. If you're looking at just, you know, an interpretation of the groundwater potentiometric surface, those kind of things are incorporated. But, you know, groundwater modeling is a much bigger issue, and that is not something that at this time is included in the conceptual site model.
This is Sarah Teschner. I'm wondering if there's some confusion between the CSE, CSM, and the purpose. And the capture of the extraction and barrier systems, that's part of the containment system evaluations that have been conducted, and will be a discussion for the one that's the effort underway or on hold right now. The conceptual site model, the components of that, while that's relevant, it's really the hydrogeologic setting, the features, the data. It's really the framework among which all of the actual groundwater flow dynamics or contaminant migration fit into.
Yeah.
I have a question. This is Margie. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So, and Diane, thank you very much for your presentation, but at times, at least to me, you faded out and I couldn't hear what you were saying. I did hear that this was not quite ready to present yet and it was under EPA oversight, but I didn't get a sense of the timing of when this is actually going to be ready to use. Can you help me understand when that might be?
Yeah. Linda, do you want to speak about the schedule?
Right. So I mean, we're working really hard to get WSD and CDPHE input in the next month, and that with the hope that it'll be ready for us to put up on our website and have a public review comment period for 30 days. And then after that, we'll finalize it. So if part of that, you know, if there's other presentations you'd like us to give once we have a draft that's ready for public review, we can have another session on that in the beginning of the public review process, so that you would be able to, you know, ask any immediate questions that you have and get clarifications, and so that you can meaningfully comment on the conceptual site model. So so this will be our goal is to get it all buttoned up in the next 3 months. So very soon.
So you've brought this slide back up again that said public review to begin in late July, early August. Is that your time frame? And the button up in 3 months, is that the late September?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
And I know we started working on this conceptual site model before I came on this site. So, I mean, it's been in the works for over a year and a half at this point, if not more. A lot of people have put a lot of research and input. Diane has spent countless hours, and when she's done a really great job, and we really appreciate it, and CDM and everyone that's contributed. But we definitely want the community's input in the states and the WSDs and any other stakeholder, City of Aurora, Arapahoe County. Please comment when it does go up, and an email will go out to everyone letting you know that it's available and where you can find it. And, you know, if you want kind of a work session to just kind of walk through the whole draft, we'd be happy to do that.
So is this going to be one of those things where EPA and CDPHE are going to get together behind closed doors and get on the same page before you release this to the public for comment?
Well, because CDPHE is our partner, we will get comments from them and include those before it goes out for community review, yes.
Okay, so this is my standard question of, are you going to get on the same page as CDPHE? Because as I say at every meeting, I am in complete disagreement with that process. So thank you that you're continuing in that same vein. Appreciate you letting me know.
That's what we do on every Superfund site that I've worked on.
Maybe that's the operative phrase, is every Superfund site you have worked on, because before you came to this Superfund site, that was not the way it was going here. Of course, CDPHE and EPA cooperated on things, but there was not a, let's get together behind closed doors and work this out. That happened when you came on board, to my recollection.
Okay, this is Bonnie, and I want to thank you, Diane, for your presentation. They're always easy to watch and good, and I do agree with you. Some of those graphics that you showed are exciting. The bottom line for me, after all these years though, and I don't know if you can answer this, but the bottom line for the CAG is this going to help us understand what is happening at the base of this Superfund site? None of these pits are lined. There's a lot of sand lenses, there's fractures, there's a lot of motion at the site because of all the heavy equipment, the trucks coming and going, so on and so forth. And so our main concern is what is happening in the base of the landfill how can we tell what's happening there? Because we really believe that as long as that 138 million gallons of waste is still there, there's always a chance there's going to be a breach. And we're really concerned about that. That's our major concern. We're also concerned with the fact that for all of these years, Denver and Waste Management have said, well, you know what, 1,4-dioxane is below standard, so it's okay if we let it go off-site and we let it naturally accumulate and everything. We've never understood that. We don't understand why it's okay to have anything going out of the Superfund site into neighboring communities. And I'm not criticizing you, Diane. This is really good, and I've seen you've done some really great work. And I know you're a scientist that just wants the facts. But I have to tell you what our concerns are, and I'm sincerely hopeful on behalf of the community that this conceptual site model might give us a hint as to what is happening in the base of this Superfund site, because we sure don't know now, and we're really concerned. So can I ask you for a preliminary observation from you? Do you think this CSM is going to help us come to any definitive conclusions at all?
Well, I will say that the purpose, the entire purpose of the CSM at all sites is to communicate the site features to all stakeholders. So if it doesn't reach that threshold, then it's not performing its use. It has extensive discussion of where the waste was placed and the fate and transport of that waste. But also, you know, I think the bottom line when it comes down to is risk receptors. There's a discussion about where this waste is and how potential receptors may or may not be exposed, and the way that the remedy components that have been put in place address those exposure scenarios. So I believe it has extensive discussion and illustrations that will show you, you know, where the components of that waste would have migrated if it did, and how the components of the remedy address those migration pathways. And then also, you know, most importantly, what receptors may be at risk, or you know, which pathways are blocked by the remedy components. So basically, yes, I think that this lays out where the waste is, you know, where it was placed, where it is now, where it would have moved, and how it's being addressed.
Okay, thank you, Diane. I appreciate that perspective. I am hopeful that your optimism proves to be true. We'll be anxiously waiting to be able to have our technical advisor review the work. We're anxious to see it. I also would like to know, Linda, I asked a question about any kind of a community review for safety, and I haven't been able to find when the last, I mean, I know that Dr. Berry and you are saying right now, if I'm not incorrect, that everything is perfectly fine with the 1,4-dioxane, you have no concerns about it. But I'm just wondering, we have so much more development out here now. Wouldn't it be a good time for the EPA to do another risk assessment and find out the new receptors you have available now and what those might be? And I mean, you got thousands more people out here, more homes. Wouldn't that be just a prudent step to take, do you think?
So, David, are you still on the line? David Berry?
Yes.
Do you want to talk about the risk assessment efforts that you've been undertaking for the last year and a half, in working with CDPHE?
Well, what we've done is looked at basically the monitoring wells that are in the north boundary plume and calculated a concentration that is representative of the average and the upper bound uh, uh, concentration on the mean of the plume, and then use that value to estimate potential risks to a future receptor if they were to utilize the groundwater for drinking water purposes. And when you do that, the concentrations that are out there result in risks that are estimated in the range of, I think, I don't have the risk assessment or the risk numbers right in front of me, but as I recall, it was 6 times 10 to the minus 6th, which is within the risk management zone that EPA uses for Superfund sites, which are risks of 1 in a million to risks of 1 in 10,000. So the risks that we estimate for a hypothetical future receptor out there are, about 6 times 10 to the minus 6th. A question arose about the use of the golf course and the exposure that golfers or some receptor associated with the golf industry or sport. We looked at that. We used some information that Steve Wharton had developed many years ago when he worked for the Golf Corps Superintendents Association, and the maximally exposed person who would be associated with the golfing industry was probably the groundskeeper. So we took data from the surface water and calculated again risk to a groundskeeper who worked on the site. He was there 12 hours a day, 6 days a week for 40 weeks. And he had incidental ingestion of the groundwater and dermal contact with the groundwater for 4 hours a day. And we estimated the risks on that exposure scenario, and they came out to be a total of 9 times 10 to the minus 7 for that exposure scenario. So we've looked at, a theoretical future resident in the area exposed to the groundwater, and we've looked at the risks associated with a groundskeeper who appears to be, from the data that Steve Wharton developed many years ago, to be the maximally exposed person in the golf industry, being the groundskeeper, and those risks were in the acceptable risk range. So we're fairly confident that we understand what the risks are, or potential risks are, to receptors out there. Now, you remarked, I think, in the last meeting that you've seen children crossing over Murphy Creek going to the store. And they would probably get their feet wet, maybe up to their ankles or maybe their knees in the water, and then going over to and then coming back across from the store. those kinds of exposures, those dermal exposures, would not result in risks that would be significant. If you looked at the groundskeeper scenario, the dermal component for exposure to the hands and the forearms, the dermal exposure and risk component were in the range of 10 to the -9th. So I'm fairly confident that casual exposure, dermal exposure, yields a minimal risk.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Berry. This is Bonnie still. Sorry, I know there's other people that want to come on, but that really doesn't make me feel any better. And if anybody else on the CAG wants to comment, I'd welcome your comments. But what I'm talking about here is doing an actual risk assessment where they actually find out who lives near the plume, take into account the fact that 1,4-dioxane and other chemicals, volatiles, do evaporate into the air, and we don't know if the plume has anything in it that could impact people living along the golf course. I'm talking about air. And as far as dermal exposure and everything, we can discuss that forever, but my concern is that we don't really know what's the impact from the plume when it's been coming down through these communities for all this time. We don't really know yet if anybody's water in Gun Club Estates or anywhere else has been impacted. And what I'm suggesting is it would be, in my opinion, a good idea to take into account the community that's out here now, who might be affected and how. And that includes the air. If some of the plume water is being drawn into basements in Murphy Creek, maybe it's not taking anything that's dangerous in, but maybe it is. We don't know. And what I'm saying is to make assumptions doesn't make the community feel safe. So that's why I'm giving this suggestion, and I'm not going to go on any further because I know other people have comments. So thank you for letting me say this.
So, and I will say, in the conceptual site model that will be up for public review, there's an extensive section on risk, and that's the last bullet on this slide. So you can see what was looked at, the calculations. Dietrich has asked for the calculations that we've used to come up with our numbers. Currently, David Berry and Tom Simmons from the state are communicating back and forth on their numbers and different things. So that's why that hasn't been finalized. But as soon as it's ready, we will send it over to Dietrich.
Okay, Linda, I do appreciate that. But again, I believe it's summaries of written numbers that people are putting together and reviewing from the past. And what I'm saying is that currently there's a different situation here and a different amount of people to be impacted. That's my concern.
Yeah.
And so I don't really want to know a summary of the past. I want to know what is the risk to current people and what are those risks from?
Yes, that will be that's in there. Diane, do you want to talk about that or?
Sure. You know, there is, like as Dr. Berry discussed, there have been calculations using current receptors, like he mentioned the groundskeeper at the golf course. And, you know, these were calculations, they were not, you know, assumptions. And the process for a risk assessment is in guidance documents that people use nationwide in terms of how do you decide who the receptors are. A resident, an industrial commercial user like the groundskeeper at the golf course, or a recreational user, you know, somebody who's out golfing, hiking, those kind of things. And the guidance has specific exposure assumptions for each of those types of receptors. So, you know, I hear you that the area has really developed since, you know, the 90s, when a lot of the preliminary risk assessments were completed. But some of those assumptions, as in a resident, it would still be assumed whether it's one resident or, you know, 1 million residents, you're looking at an individual. So, you know, some of the development that has been going on would not, you know, particularly impact those assumptions that you make in terms of how many hours somebody's going to be exposed to it, how they're going to be exposed to it. And then the chemical itself really is particular in terms of how you're exposed to things. I mean, some things are really bad if they get on your skin. Some things aren't. Some things are really bad if you inhale them. Some things are not, you know, so there are different calculations that, you know, you have specialists like Dr. Berry look at from a chemical specific, from an exposure specific, and a receptor specific component. And then, you know, Dr. Berry puts all of those together and does a calculation of the risks. So there are updated risk assessments in the conceptual site model. There are also discussions of the previous risk assessments that were done in the 90s. Because, you know, a lot of those calculations are still valid today in terms of, you know, using the maximum concentration that was detected in the waste itself. So hopefully that kind of answers a little bit more of your question, but there is a robust discussion of risk, including current risks at the site in the CSM.
Thank you, Diane. That didn't help me a lot because new information is coming out all the time, and now 1,4-dioxane is known to vaporize. They found it under the convenience store in Murphy Creek and in the store, and I'm concerned about that aspect of it. And for a number of years now, we were told, I can remember when they first told us about 1,4-dioxane, Benita Lavelle from EPA came out and had a meeting with people in Murphy Creek and said, we don't see any health risks. We see no problem, and we're just going to let that stuff naturally attenuate because it's not dangerous. Well, you look at it now and it's different. And so please understand what our concerns are and why we're hesitant to think that the summary of risks to human health don't necessarily make us feel secure.
Diane, I think that one area that might help if you put it into the conceptual site model is if you've measured levels of 1,4-dioxane in basements at Murphy Creek where they have sump pumps and may have closed in and have people living there much more than 12 hours a day. And then if you don't have those measurements, then you can't really tell what the risk is in those homes. So that's one of the questions I think that we would appreciate having answered. Another is, Diane, your models really look great. I'm wondering if they're going to go down to the lignite layer. And if they're going to tell us such things as, where does the lignite layer stop? Is it just beyond the north boundary barrier wall? Where does each one of the specific, the on-weather Dawson, the weather Dawson, on-weather Denver, weather Denver, where do those things peter out? Because all the way up to Mississippi or in that area, I understand that you're in the Denver. So there's no more on weather Dawson or weather Dawson. So those things would help us, and then think that they would help us understand the fate and transport of contamination as well. And as to whether this 1,4-dioxane really is now in the Denver aquifer area.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a comment from a CAG member. The comment goes like this: the groundskeeper example likely does very little. Sorry, monitoring who's coming and going too. The groundskeeper example likely does very little for a valid comparison. They have an off season. Hold on, thank you. They have an off season. Someone living here, if they have children that were very much like my boys, they would be in the creek on weekends, after school, whatever. Let's see, I think that was the gist of the comment. We also have a question that goes back to to the presentation. And Sonia, go ahead. You have a question about the public review. Still with us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So that transformation of the numeric data into visual representations is so powerful and impressive. And I wanted to know, during the public review process, if in reviewing that the representations that you have included in the CSM, if we find that some critical aspect of data, some data set that we find really important, if it hasn't been represented in one of those transformations, can we request such a representation of a data set that isn't transformed?
I think that's a question for Linda. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would put it in your comments, and you know, it's also something that we can talk about. And I mean, if it's a valid, if we go through it and we think it's important to add to it, we will. So, but if we have a reason that we're not going to change that, we'll give you a reason why. So, yes, definitely include any type of comments on things like that. And that's why we have lots of people review these things, because the more eyes on it, the better. There might be things we missed. So it's very helpful to us to have that type of feedback.
Great. We have Margie Sogi has another, Sobi, sorry. Margie Sobi has another comment, please.
Thank you. I agree with a lot of the statements that are being made, particularly Tom's comment about checking out the sump areas in the Murphy Creek basements. That's a really good point. And I also agree with Bonnie. I have no idea, I don't remember who did some original models that said it would be 200 years before there was any problem to any of the communities around that landfill. We know how inaccurate that particular assumption was based on a model. So I too have to agree with Bonnie. I don't get any comfort from hearing the risk assessment that's being discussed. I don't get any comfort from hearing that a lot of the data is old. And I do agree with Bonnie that we have a whole new set of circumstances out here now, and including the COVID virus. So none of that's making me feel good. Thank you.
Thank you, Margie. If we, do folks have any more questions? We're down to our last minute.
I have a comment, if I could. Hopefully there's not too much background noise because I live with a bunch of kids, but I appreciate Diane giving that conceptual model information. That's just probably the best stuff I've seen since the 3 years I've been on this route. But one of the things that I just want to re-emphasize, which has already been said, she said that there's been robust discussion about these things. But the challenge we have is that we're not a part of the robust discussion. We're a part of the result from those discussions. So along the way, if all of this conceptual site model, as Margie said, you go behind the door, you figure out what you want to tell everybody, you come out and tell everybody, we have a question and say we disagree. Well, you can't disagree with the final authority of the the EPA, so it's too late, too bad. So that's where the trust breaks down, and that's the challenge that we face. As long as those kind of dynamics go on in this group, it's very hard for us to feel good about what's happening and see progress through trust. Thank
Oh, Janine, I think you're unmuted.
Yeah, yeah. Trying not to be too obnoxious. We do have one more comment to add to comments that Margie made regarding the conversations between CDPHE and EPA. We believe we are excluded from benefiting from these conversations and finding where the potential conflicts or agreements exist between these two entities. We are the people who are directly affected by the actual movement of these chemicals and not at the theoretical level. So being part of the conversation throughout the development of the CSM is vital to us. Before we close anything out, Dietrich has an announcement that he'd very much like to make.
That's fun to unmute, but I apologize. I was just fixing to send an email, but to the folks on the next technical meeting that was originally planned for July 9th, and there was a request to move it to June 23rd. We're not going to be ready that early. We've kind of tried to see how much we can get through this week, and it's not happening. So just kind of a heads up to the folks that are involved on that. I'll send out an email and let's see if we can set a date that's closer to July, the originally proposed date of July 9th.
Dietrich, I'd strongly recommend not scheduling it that week. That's a traditional vacation week. Maybe we could go later in July.
I think that's exactly what's happening.
Okay, great.
Well, folks, that puts us right at 6:30. So unless we have some really pressing questions or comments that you'd like to add, excuse my hoarse voice, I think we'll close the meeting.
Lisa, yeah, just one last comment. At our meeting where we were discussing the drunk raccoons in Murphy Creek, Tom Butts with Tri-County said, well, call Tri-County because we want to know about things like that. And so that's why we sent out the notice of the bunny rabbits to Brian Hlavacek at Tri-County. I appreciate the information that was given tonight. And if we see any more drunk raccoons or funny bunnies, we will be sure to contact the right people, not Tri-County.
Thank you for that.
Bonnie, I'm a little confused by your statement. Tri-County responded to that as well. Did you not get that email?
Who is this speaking?
Tom Butts.
Oh, hi, Tom. Now tell me your question again.
I said I'm a little confused by your statement. I believe Tri-County received and shared that information about the rabbits and responded to you and others as well.
Yeah, it was responded to, but I guess we're supposed to go to a different organization now who has control over this. And the response we got, I mean, are you talking about Lynn Robio's response to us?
Well, certainly the city of Aurora has animal control. There's naturalists with state parks and wildlife as well as with the city of Aurora. So I think there's lots of resources, and I don't know well on that at this point.
Okay, well, we were the CAG when we discussed it. We remembered what you had said, that you want to know about these things. However, it seems that from tonight's information, there's maybe some other agency that we need to go to directly, but we don't care one way or the other. We just want to get the information out there about drunk raccoons and funny bunnies.
Well, that gave us enough time to go ahead and come up with one more question. Regarding the numerous comments made about additional data that the community feels is essential to be collected, e.g. basement data, wells, etc. Please respond regarding what we would need to do in order to formally request such data collection, or what circumstances would need to obtain to compel such data collection.
So, I mean, I send your request to Lisa and then EPA will look at it. I would say we have put a lot of effort into the risk assessment and the conceptual site model. So I would like for you to look at that and read it to see if the information you need is in there already. Under the remedial program, we can't compel certain things to happen with the PRP unless there's a known risk found in a 5-year review. So under the remedial program, which this is under, I cannot promise anything. But certainly submit your request to Lisa and we'll look at it and get back with you.
Looks like we have a comment from Karen.
What now?
Oh, sorry, Janine, I was jumping in on that Karen's comment.
One last comment from the chat. Karen, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify because there seems to be some misunderstanding about wildlife and Aurora. Aurora has no jurisdiction over wildlife. That is wholly the property of the state. So it is appropriate that Destin provided that information. If you have a dog running loose in your neighborhood, please feel free to call animal control. But if you have a rabbit or a raccoon, please contact the state. Thank you.
And then Karen, since you're here, can you talk about the city's perspective on those reclaimed water ponds in the golf course? Like, is that something that people should be drinking or playing in, or are there prohibitions on that, or what is the city's role in that?
I provided information, sorry, I'm having trouble with the clicking. I can have the right people get on the agenda for talking about that, but obviously we do not recommend that anyone drink the water. We did have our manager of golf respond to some security issues that we've had. If there is an issue with the golf course and kids playing in it or somebody doing something that they're not supposed to do, they can feel free to call Access Aurora at 303-739-7000 and they will get you to the right person. That is our manager of golf, understands that they had some trouble with security issues when the golf course was shut down because of COVID. So should you see those, that is definitely an Aurora jurisdiction issue. And you can absolutely follow up with me if you'd like, but I'm going to end up sending you to the manager of golf. So if there's any other questions about that, let me know.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're really at the end now. So I appreciate the rich discussion we've had. Q&As have been very good. And as far as just wrapping up the meeting, the next CAG meeting in July currently the only agenda item that's proposed is the summary of the surface and groundwater technical meetings. With the date being pushed back, I'm not sure we'll still be able to do that, but I'm assuming so. Other than that, please feel free to send your proposals to me and or Bonnie and Janine, and we can put them on the agenda. If we're all good with your questions and comments, we'll adjourn the meeting and have a lovely rainy evening.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks to everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Diane and Dave.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, all.
Thank you, everybody.